All right, it's just about 4 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. I saw we had a few more people joining us, so we're glad to have you here with us today. As long as we are good to go, I'm going to go ahead and get started with some introductions for today's programming. So happy to be with you guys today on this, it's sunny here. I don't know if it's sunny where you are, but on this sunny afternoon, we're going to be talking about how to unlock emotional intelligence to reach your career potential. In this webinar about emotional intelligence, the missing link for your lasting career success is sponsored by Career Growth today. Going to talk a little bit about career growth and what we do and how we help clients achieve their career goals. And so we complete professional resumes. We train our clients in a variety of different interview techniques, including behavioral event interviewing, which is another standard of interviewing techniques used by a lot more employers nowadays. We provide you with the skills and the techniques that are going to enable you to be more successful in preparing for and completing those job interviews. We recruit our business from the grassroots level, and we really take time to understand each client so that we can create a customized individual plan that's really going to help suit their needs. So as we go through today, if you have any questions, please let me know. We're really here to kind of help you and understand how we can use our resources to help you be more successful in either figuring out what your next career goal is, creating some concrete business strategies, and just really working with you one-on-one to help you achieve success, whatever that might look like for you. Speaking of success, if you take a look at our website, you can see examples of some of our clients who landed some of their dream positions, right? And so we're big components of starting where you are. So regardless of what your goal is, we're going to equip you with the strategies you need to get to that next level. And so if you have some time and you take a look at the website, you can see various different testimonials from people of all levels, leaders, CEOs, executive assistants, IT professionals, education professionals, scrolling through a couple now on the screen for you, customer service representatives. So regardless of what industry you're in, we have tons of resources that are going to be available to help you with that next step, right? Including coaching, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about as we sort of go along today. So we also provide one-on-one coaching. So if you're feeling stuck and you're not sure how to get to that next step, we're here for that too as a resource for you. A little bit about me. So my name's Emily Carlino. I have over 10 years experience in workforce development and higher education. Currently, I'm a career and professional development coach, as well as an education specialist. So I started my career many years ago. I won't tell you how many in corporate healthcare. I started at the bottom level, their entry level position within the company, and I worked my way up, doing various different jobs. I was heavily involved in recruiting for a lot of our student programs, and then I moved over to the education side of things and really helped with workforce development. And I ran some programs for colleagues at the organization that I worked with that really helped with internal mobility. So I'm going to talk about how I coach people and a little bit about my strategy on the next slide. But I've been doing this for a very long time. And so I help people start where they are and figure out what the next steps are to help them achieve their goals, whatever that might be. My coaching style is really reflective based. So perfect for our topic today of emotional intelligence. You're going to learn a little bit about what emotional intelligence is. I'll go over the agenda, but keep in mind that that's a skill that we can build together, and that's something that coaching can help you with. In addition to emotional intelligence, I'm a very big component of values-based coaching. So just like, within the components of career growth, I really listen to people on an individual level, and I enjoy sort of figuring out what drives them, what motivates them, and really what their passions are. So it's really a conversation, right? We'll figure out what your passions are. I'll listen, we'll do some skills assessments, and then we'll figure out how to translate all of that, your skills, your passions, your background, all your past experiences into, concrete career goals or, other things that you can use to sort of help leverage you on your career journey. A couple housekeeping things. So everyone on the call today is on mute. So just make sure that you keep your phone silent and things like that. It'll help with a better learning experience. There will be a Q&A session at the end. However, I'm going to do my really best to keep an eye on the chat box. And so I know I have some folks from Career Growth here with me, so I don't want to miss anything. So we'll keep an eye on the chat box. And occasionally throughout the presentation today, I'm going to be calling attention to things that are going to be put in the chat box. We have a couple activities, and we also have some polls that we're going to set up for you. So the intent of today is for it to be really engaging. I know sometimes in a virtual environment that can be difficult, and it's been quite an adjustment for many of us. But with these virtual presentations, please ask questions, put them in the chat. I want to do my best to make sure that we get everything that we can out of the time that we have today, right? Because it is limited. So again, I encourage it. Put your questions in the chat. We'll kind of be monitoring them, and I will do my very best to get to everyone that I can in the time that we have. Another important thing to call to your attention, I want to let everyone know that there's a bonus at the end. So for anybody that stays on with us the entire time today, till the end of the webinar, you're going to get $169 worth of bonus material. And so we'll circle back to that towards the end of the presentation, and I can answer questions and explain a little bit more, but make sure you hang out with us the whole time today so that you can have access to that additional material. So what are we going to talk about today for the next hour and a half or so? We're going to talk about emotional intelligence. I'm going to go over the definition of emotional intelligence, just in case you've never heard it before. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between being emotionally intelligent, so EQ, and being intellectually intelligent, so IQ, or often called your book smarts, right? We're going to go into a little bit of a high level understanding of some of the different components of emotional intelligence, and then dive a little bit deeper into some of those quadrants of EI and how you can use them every day. I have a little bit of anatomy peppered in there. So we're going to talk about the science of how your brain works, how our brain processes emotions, right? Got some activities in there for you today. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to go over some benefits of being emotionally intelligent, and also how can this help you at work, right? Because that's why you're all here. So we're going to talk about how emotional intelligence can help you succeed professionally by equipping you with some skills that you're going to need for success. So the textbook definition of emotional intelligence, as written by Daniel Goleman, he is kind of the founder of emotional intelligence, published a lot of really, really great books on the topic. In case anybody's interested in resources after this class today, I would encourage you to go ahead and Google his name. But the definition of emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and the feelings of others, for motivating ourselves, and for managing our emotions well in ourselves and also in our relationships. So it seems like a pretty heavy definition, but if you look to the right of the screen, there's 4 little bubbles, and those are the quadrants of emotional intelligence. And so there's 4 main components we're going to talk about today. Self-awareness being the first, self-management being the second, social awareness being the third, and then relationship management being the fourth. So we're going to walk through those, and I'm going to give you some kind of tips and tricks throughout the presentation for how to build your skills in each one of those areas. Sound good? All right. So why does this matter, right? Why did you all log into this webinar? Why do we want to learn about emotional intelligence? Today, especially in the competitive job market, we're all being judged by a different set of credentials, right? It's not just about our book smarts or our IQ, how smart we are. It's more than just the courses that we've taken and the diplomas that we've collected. We're also being judged and evaluated by potential employers and by our peers in how well we conduct ourselves in situations and how well we communicate with other people, right? So when you apply emotional intelligence, it really equips you with the skills that you're going to need to create better, stronger relationships. And that's going to help you regardless of your industry. It's going to help you connect better to clients, to other professionals. And as I talk through some of these pointers today, you might even find that it's also going to help you in your personal life. So diving right in, I mentioned the difference between the two, IQ versus EQ. They are both important. However, recent studies from LinkedIn and Career Builder have actually come out with some pretty interesting data that says employers are actually more interested in potential candidates' relationship building, communication, conflict management, and change resiliency skills, right? Than some of the hard skills that might be necessary to do the job. And so all of those themes that I just mentioned fall under the EQ bucket, right? When you think of IQ, emotion or intellectual intelligence, those are kind of like the hard skills that you need to be able to do for your job. If it's data entry, do you have the knowledge and the skill base to work in Excel, right? So very, very important. But if an employer had to choose between somebody who was, at all basic levels able to do the work, right? Good at the job, they can use Excel, they can do the data entry, versus somebody who had the hard skill and would be able to work in multiple different databases, but they also were excellent at communication and relationship building. Chances are the client with the emotional intelligence with the higher EQ would get the position. Very, very important skills. As I'm sure all of you know, in the job market, whether you're looking for positions now, you're interviewing, or you're in a company, you're part of an organization and you want to grow, you need to have these social communication skills to be able to identify emotions and figure out how you can use the knowledge gained from reading people to help you, leverage yourself in your own career. We doing so far? Any questions from any of the participants? I just took a quick peek at the chat. I didn't see anything, but feel free to put them in there as we go along, and I'll be happy to kind of answer things as they come up. So we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of emotional intelligence. I'm going to preface this by saying I am in no way a clinician. I have just learned about the science of emotional intelligence through my years of coaching experience, and the various other resources as it relates to my work. But on a very kind of high level, there's basically two main parts to our brain, right? There's the frontal lobe, which you'll see circled and highlighted in pink there. And the frontal lobe is our thinking brain, right? That is responsible for all of our rational, reasonable, logical decision making, right? And then there's the second part of our brain, and that is the limbic system. And there's several different components in that system, but that is our emotional brain, or our feeling brain. And so it's very important that those two components are constantly communicating and working together, because that's what's going to help you regulate your emotions. I did see a question in the chat, and I'm not sure. We can circle back to it at the end, or if our folks from Career Growth want to follow up, they're asking about copies of slides at the end of the material. So we will get back to you on that, and thank you for asking that question. So in thinking about the way our brain works, I'm sure you probably all heard of fight or flight, right? Or when your adrenaline starts pumping. And I invite you now to think with me about a time when that happened. Our brains are hardwired to look for threats everywhere, right? So what happens when we start to feel stressed or threatened? You kind of feel your blood pumping a little bit, right? Your face might get red. Your heart might start pounding. You might change your breathing. All of those things are a response to outside threat as perceived by our brain. And so when this happens, the brain releases chemicals, and those chemicals are adrenaline and cortisone. And those are kind of like, I call them the fight or flight chemicals, right? So I'm sure we have all experienced that at some point in our life. Those chemicals are released from an area in our brain kind of called the amygdala. And so the amygdala is like the epicenter of our brain, right? It's kind of what houses all of our, I call it our emotional powerhouse, right? This is where our behavior and all of our motivation come from. And so when I teach people about the brain, not being a clinician, right? One of the exercises I like to do, unfortunately, I cannot see you all, but you're welcome to participate in this with me, is I invite you to make your own tiny brain. Now, I know all of you listening today have very, very big brains because you are investing in yourself and you're attending this webinar today. So I'm not trying to say that you all have tiny brains, but we're going to make one together and we're going to do it with your hands. Hopefully this will translate well via Zoom. And if you can all see my hand as I'm holding it in front of the camera, your forearm and your wrist would then make up your limbic system. And this would be your brain stem, okay? Smack dab in the middle of your palm here, this is your amygdala. And so this is the emotional epicenter for your brain. So if you go ahead and take your thumb and put it on the center of your hand, and then you're going to fold your fingertips over the amygdala. And so essentially what we've just done is we've created a brainstem. Here's the limbic system and the amygdala, and your prefrontal cortex or your frontal lobe are now completely wired, connected. As you can see, the fingertips here are touching my thumb. And so they're interacting together in a healthy way. When your brain looks like this, we say your brain is online, okay? So hopefully I had some of you making some tiny brains as I was going through that. But the idea is it's the complex interaction between those two parts of your brain that really accounts for our ability to manage stress and also for our ability to manage emotions. People with a higher level of emotional intelligence are much more effectively able to constantly and consistently regulate their emotions. So having EI is kind of like having a third checks and balances system in place for, and we're all guilty of it, when tensions get high or emotions are high or you're in a stressful situation. People who have high emotional intelligence, their brains are wired a little bit differently through practice, right? This is something that you can develop. And they're much more able to calmly and collectively handle themselves in those types of situations. So I want you to keep thinking about the amygdala as we sort of go throughout the presentation today, because I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. We talked a little bit about emotions in the past couple slides, right? Emotions really are our impulses to act. They're what drives our behavior and our motivation. But I think, maybe most importantly, emotions are contagious. And so I would invite you to just think about an example when you were affected by the emotional state of someone else. I mean, it could be, personal, friend or family member. It could be a colleague, or it could be a boss or a leader that you encountered at some point in your life. And think about a time when someone else affected you positively, right? So their emotions and their kind of mood really uplifted you and helped you feel better. And then think about a time when you were around someone and they impacted you negatively. Maybe they didn't have to do or say much of anything, but you could just tell, something was off, or they weren't in a good mood, or they didn't regulate their emotions well, right? And they responded to you maybe kind of aggressively. that's kind of contagious, right? I know I've been in situations where somebody's mood can kind of affect how I interact with them. So it's important to be aware of, what's going on with other people. And if somebody's behavior seems off, then sort of putting that checks and balances in place, right? Before you react, take a moment to think. And that's really what emotional intelligence is about. It's taking a healthy pause and using these skills to help you navigate through life, and in the workplace to help you navigate through your daily interactions with your colleagues, clients, peers, and professionals. In reading other people and learning to do that in a professional setting, 90%, it's important to understand 90% of the emotional message is nonverbal. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. You rely on these nonverbal skills and your EI skills on a daily basis, more than you even realize it, right? Uh, there's lots of different ways that you can apply these skills. So some of us are more in tune to how others might be thinking and feeling, just by maybe the way they stand, the way they walk, their facial expressions. All of that has to do with your body language. So I'm going to share a story with you, and then we're going to move into a little activity. And we have some polls set up for you. So I'll explain that in a moment. But here's my story. So one of my very first jobs that I had, not too long after college, I worked in an office, and full disclosure, not really a morning person. And so every morning I would go into my office at 8 o'clock, and I absolutely love coffee. Another fun, not relevant fact about myself, but I love coffee. So I would get my coffee from the cafeteria, and I would walk past every single one of my coworkers. And it was 7:30 in the morning, so I didn't say hello. I didn't really say anything. I just kind of drank my coffee, as I was walking, sat down at my desk, and the very first thing I did every morning before I acknowledged anybody was my email. And that's kind of how I operated for like my first 3 or 4 weeks there. Well, lo and behold, I was really surprised when my supervisor called me into her office, and some of the staff had complained about me. They had said that I was intimidating, that I was not friendly, and gave me some other really constructive criticism and feedback, which was difficult to hear at the time. And so I share this with you because there were certain things that I was doing as we start to think about body language and nonverbals. And I'm sure you're probably already picking up on some of the things that I did wrong, such as walking with my head down, not saying hello, no eye contact, no smiles. And it's not that I'm not a friendly person. Catch me after 10 o'clock, I'm great. So those small things really changed the way people perceived me. And I think that's an important message. And so after I addressed the situation and changed some of my behaviors in the morning, like saying hello before I sat down at my computer, making sure I smiled at the receptionist, making sure I said hello to my colleagues and things like that. Their perception of me changed, and I built stronger working relationships. So in the next couple slides, we're going to kind of go over some images. And these images are from a common body language test. And so we're going to play a little game, and we're going to see how well you understand some nonverbal cues. All right. So the folks at Career Growth have the poll up, or we have the poll up for you. So take a look at this woman, and based on the body language you see, what do you guys think? What is the emotion that she's most likely feeling? Take a few minutes. Some different responses coming in. Looks like right now, sad is leading the poll at about 29%. Some of you guys think she's tired or conflicted, thoughtful, and puzzled. Puzzled is going up to 11% now. All right. It looks like, based on the polling, most of you think that this person might be feeling conflicted. Looks like it's 37% conflicted and 32% sad. So I'm going to give you the answer. Are you ready? This particular woman is feeling sad. And so if you're wondering why, the first time that I took the assessment, I actually thought she was conflicted as well. But emotions are always open to interpretation, right? And so as we go through these next exercises, it's important to, that's why communication is so important, right? Because there could be a lot of different answers to how she's feeling. The thing that we do know is she's not happy, right? We know she's not angry. No one really seemed to think she was angry, but there are certain things about her body language and her posture. And so it was really close call for me between conflicted and sad. But ultimately the results on the quiz identified her as being sad. And it has a lot to do, and it's, you can't see, well, the picture of her face, you can kind of tell, I hope, that she's sitting down on the ground. I don't know if that translated well, but she's sitting on the ground and her eyes are down and her chin is down. And so there's just certain things that we look for when we're reading the emotions of other people. Got another one for you. So based on this man's body language, what emotion do you think he's most likely feeling? And if there are any comments in the chat, I would love to read them. If you have any thoughts about maybe why you thought, you know, a particular emotion resonated more strongly than another based on body language. Like we're back and forth between nervous or bored. That's very interesting, right? Because they're two completely different emotions. Very interesting. Looks like bored might take it. Hopefully everybody had a chance to get their vote in. All right, it looks like bored is the winner of this poll at 48%. So I would love to just kind of see in the chat, or, I would invite, if anybody, wants to kind of think, it seemed, like some people thought nervous, some people thought bored. Any comments as to why we sort of thought those two? Feel free to let me know as we go throughout if you do have comments or anything. Just put them in the chat. So the answer to this particular question is apprehensive. So nervous and apprehensive, very, very closely related as far as emotions go. I can absolutely see why many people thought he was bored, just because of the slumpy shoulders and the hands and the head. What makes him apprehensive, according to this particular quiz, is the position of his eyes. And it's almost as if he's waiting for something. When I first saw the picture, I thought he was, potentially on a couch waiting for an appointment, like maybe a doctor's appointment or a counselor's appointment or something like that. But nervousness and apprehension are very, very closely related. So good job there. And again, we're paying attention to things like posture, shoulders, or the placement of the hands, and really the direction and tilt of the eyes too. The eyes can tell you a lot about what somebody is thinking and feeling. So great job with that. Thank you for participating. Tons of additional quizzes and research out there on body language and reading body language. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to kind of Google that. You can find a whole bunch of different ones. If you're, want to take it back to your teams at work, and maybe a fun little exercise for you to do just to see how well your colleagues know how to read emotions. Oh, and I'm reading a comment in there that said, I thought he was looking around for something more interesting. That's funny. Yeah, again, it did kind of look like he was bored as well. So I know I've seen my kids make similar faces. So very, very, very closely related to some of the other ones. Makes it tricky to guess sometimes. Also, kind of as I said before, even when we did the poll, you saw everybody kind of split the results between different selections there. So, keep in mind it's open to interpretation as well, which is why it's so important to have those good communication skills. So that if you notice something and you're not quite sure, by their body language, you ask, right? And use it as an opportunity to create some dialogue. So the next part of the presentation, we're going to go through some of those quadrants that I mentioned, just in terms of emotional intelligence. And the first one we're going to talk about, there's 4: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So the first one that we're going to talk about today is self-awareness. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's important and what does it mean to be self-aware. And so I think the important thing to understand about emotional intelligence is it really starts from within, right? Nobody can make us become more emotionally intelligent. Certainly, working with a coach can help you build your skills. But as you remember when we talked about the brain, that's kind of where our motivation comes from and all of that stuff. So it really starts from within. And it's really our responsibility to understand our emotions, to be able to look internally and recognize, if we're feeling a certain type of way, what's going on? Why are we feeling that way? One of my favorite examples is the Snickers commercials. Not sure if you guys have seen those, but the hungry, right? Why wait? Grab a Snickers when you're hangry, is what they say oftentimes. So we all kind of have triggers, things that just stress us out. So being self-aware has to do with really practicing self-reflection. And so identifying when you might feel those strong emotions, right? Remember I said I'm not a morning person. Well, I need to be more self-aware in the mornings because, there are certain things that I'm more vulnerable to in terms to stressors and triggers. So I want to avoid kind of having a negative reaction to something that might trigger me. Everybody has different stressors and different environmental things, but really sort of taking that moment to sort of pause and say, okay, how am I showing up today? What am I feeling? So it's important, just as it is to check in, with your coworkers, to check in, with your spouse or partner or your kids. It's important to check in with yourself as well. And so when thinking about self-awareness, what matters most is how you see yourself, right? Your outlook, and whether or not you're able to more positively frame and reframe the things in your life. So we all kind of have this inner dialogue where, especially with our, in our professional careers, when things are stressing us out or we have deadlines or, we don't think that we're good enough, we're not going to apply for that promotion, we're not going to make that investment in ourselves because we're scared for whatever reason. And so really taking that time to practice self-reflection and identify those barriers. What's holding me back? Why am I not visualizing success, right? I'm sure you've probably heard that before, but it's absolutely 100% true. And there's science and much, much evidence to back up that people who are able to visualize their success, think more positively about themselves, and reframe when setbacks happen, end up being those leaders, people that advance within the organization, and just all around, much more successful in both their personal and professional lives. Now, on the flip side, if you want to have greater self-awareness, you can't just always focus on all the positive things, right? We all have qualities that we need to improve. I don't usually use the term weakness. I prefer, opportunity for improvement or something along those lines. But it's important for us to be aware of those things as well. Because just like we want to figure out what our strengths are, and then hone in on them and develop them, which is one thing that working with a coach can really help you do. We also want to look at those things that maybe we're not so good at, and learn how we can also develop those and build skills that we can get stronger in those areas, which is something that coaching can also help you with. So the second step really in these four quadrants, is self-management. Um, and I started with self-awareness because you can't really manage your emotions if you're not aware of what they are, right? And so self-management is really the ability to let go of emotions and not act on them. So not saying that it's, you don't have to not feel. Like, it's okay to have emotions. We get angry, we get frustrated, we're stressed. We get happy, we get sad, all of those things. It's okay to have emotions, but especially in the workplace, we need some sort of checks and balances for helping us to regulate them. And so that's really what self-management is. You can acknowledge what you're feeling, but choose not to act on it. Self-management is where our sense of adaptability comes from. How easy is it for us to kind of adapt when things change, or if you're working on a project and something goes wrong. Are you the type of person that would slam your hands on the table and walk away because you're just done and you're frustrated? I've worked with people like that. They're not always easy to work with. Or are you the type of person that would kind of take a breath and sit down and use that achievement orientation and that more positive outlook to say something along the lines of, like, okay, we're going to reframe this situation. Yes, we had a failure, it is a setback, but we're going to see it as an opportunity to do things better the next time. That's something that an emotionally intelligent person would do and would say, and that is the type of thinking and professionalism that is really, really valued by employers, especially in today's marketplace, because everything that all of the changes that people went through with COVID, working from home, working remotely, that was crazy stressful. um, uh, if I can, I see we have a comment in the chat, and I would like to read it. But before I do, can Antoinette just confirm that that's okay, and then maybe we'll
Absolutely.
go.
Yeah. Yeah, that is okay.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. So thank you for your comment. So I had the strangest reaction yesterday. I'm currently on a temporary assignment as a cost accountant, but due to COVID, I said I wanted to work from home. My boss called and said she was hiring a cost accountant that will be there all the days of the week, that they were moving things around, and that I would be working on a different team with the director of finance. So uh, I can't see what happened to oh, here we go. I moved it. Um, let's see. Okay, so you were telling a story about what happened with your boss, and now they're moving things around, and you've invested all of this time. But her saying that made you wonder if you were going to get fired. And instead of being happy for the first time, you were stepping into that environment. It was strange, and you felt a negative reaction. Wow, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So again, even the way that somebody delivers news to you or shares information, um, pretty much anytime we interact with someone, in any kind of medium, whether it's over the phone, via virtual, email, in person, we really have to be careful about what's behind the words that we say, right? How we deliver a message. So, hey, can we talk? Right? Sounds totally different than we need to talk. So being aware of, things that even just go beyond your body language, that to include your tone of voice. I'm sure we've all had conversations, with our kids. If you have kids, maybe, a friend, a family member, or a spouse, where we said, hey, I don't like your tone. Also important to think about, the way that your voice sounds when you deliver messages. So, very, very self-aware in recognizing that. So I told you to remember the amygdala. And so I want to talk briefly about something called an amygdala hijack. And then we're going to come back to this one more time today before the presentation is over. So when I mentioned the amygdala and how it was the emotional epicenter of your brain, right? And how we need the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex to be online in order for us to better regulate our emotions. When our brain is working well, this is what it looks like. It's a happy little brain. When something happens, like we perceive a threat, and to the comments that we just read and talked about, it could be something as a negative reaction from your boss, right? When you start to sense a threat, something changes in our brain, and our brain goes offline. They call it, flipping your lid, so to speak, for this exercise. So when your brain goes offline, what happens to our emotions, and what happens, when our two parts of our brain, our thinking brain and our feeling brain, can't communicate anymore? That amygdala is exposed, and our brains are no longer able to process what's going on. And so sometimes that's where those out of proportion reactions, those negative feelings, and the behaviors that follow come from. So as soon as we're triggered by something, and we sort of flip out, right? We're no longer able to control our emotions. I've talked to people that have said things to me like, oh my gosh, it was so crazy. It was like I blacked out. I didn't even mean to say it, and it just came out of my mouth. That is called an amygdala hijack. The real medical term, also feel free to Google that as well if you want to learn more about emotional intelligence and all things brain and science. But as we sort of go through the next slide and we continue to talk about EI and ways in which you can learn to better regulate yourself, I want you to think about, if that's ever happened to you, and maybe kind of think of an example of a time that had happened. So the next part, couple parts of the presentation is we're going to be talking about, okay, so now we're aware of what our emotions are, right? We've done our homework, we've practiced self-reflection, we know what our emotions are, and we've even done a little bit of work on managing them so that we don't, flip out and have those reactions. So the next thing is really social awareness. Right. And social awareness has to do with a lot of different things, but primarily it's the practice of having empathetic conversations and using empathy in your everyday life. I'm going to explain a little bit more about how I view and how I see empathy in the next slide. But I'm also going to touch on organizational awareness, right? And so understanding when you're in a workplace, what is the hierarchy? What is the structure? Who do you need to talk to if you want to get buy-in for a particular project? What steps might you need to take as far as internal mobility if you're looking for a promotion and things like that? How does that work in your organization? It's a little bit, what are the politics, right? Who's the right person to speak to? So really sort of understanding a little bit about the organization that you work for, and their company culture. Culture is so important, not just in our personal lives and our own individual cultures as well, but the culture of an organization is really important to understand. And every organization has a unique set of values and a mission statement. And I encourage every client that I ever work with to pay very, very close attention to that, because connecting to companies and organizations that value the same things that you do and where you connect to their mission, those are the places where you're going to be happier. And as we continue to talk about the benefits of EI and what happens when your workforce people are happy, a lot of great things come from being happier at work. And usually the people who are more self-aware and socially aware and tuned into these kinds of things end up following the opportunities that lead them to the greatest success for workplace happiness. So what does it mean to be empathetic? To me, empathy is just more, it's not just saying you're sorry, right? You can say sorry. When my kids used to fight and I would be like, apologize, they'd be like, I'm sorry, right? But they were never really sorry. So they weren't very empathetic. Thankfully, they've grown into a lot more empathetic individuals over the last several years. But it's so much more than just saying you're sorry. It's really trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand the feelings of others. Understand how your actions and your behaviors affect the people around you, right? Go back to emotions are contagious. Behavior, is contagious. Body language is contagious. All of those things, you impact the people around you on a daily basis, and you might not even be aware of it. One of the easiest ways that you can build empathy is by practicing active listening. If that's a term that you haven't heard before, I'm going to share with you a little bit about. So, active listening. When somebody is talking, right? I've been chatting with you for about 45 minutes now. You don't have to put it in the chat. You can if you want to. Think about how many times you might have thought about something else, right? You might have said, oh, what am I going to make for dinner? Or oh, I have to go pick up the kids. Or oh, I need to let my dog out. We do that so much more often than we realize when people are talking to us. Our brains tend to go a mile a minute, and we have so many different things going on that is really hard for us to stop and pause and give somebody else individualized attention and really listen and hear their concerns. So that's what it means to practice empathy. So, I invite you, over the weekend, throughout the rest of, the next few weeks to practice that a little bit more. And, when somebody is chatting with you or talking to you, whether it's, at work or it's a family member or a friend, really pay attention to how much your mind wanders and really try to focus in a little bit more and give that person some of the attention that they might need. We talked about organizational awareness already as far as having a better understanding of the structure and the culture of the companies that you work for. This comes in handy again when you're evaluating different places that you might want to consider working for, and you're thinking about how do their values align with what's important to me. So kind of having a good idea of the inner workings of an organization is going to help you better navigate the different departments or different positions. Sometimes when people are looking for new careers or they want to change, you might not have to go outside your organization, right? You might actually be able to move departments or find another position within your organization. And so that's when kind of using emotional intelligence to help build your network and networking and really getting a better idea of the organization. That's kind of where that's going to come into play for you. So the next slide that we're going to talk a little bit about is relationship management. And so there's lots of different types of relationships that we can have with people. When we think about our daily relationships, you might have a coach and mentor type relationship if you're in an office setting, inspirational leadership. Our ability to manage relationships directly correlates to how much influence we have. And especially for any leaders on the call today or people in business who are looking for that strategy that's really going to help them get to the next level, it's how well do you influence the people around you? How are you with conflict management, and how do you build and instill trust among the teams of people that you work with, right? You have to know how to manage relationships. People skills are huge, and over the last several years they've gotten a lot more attention. Emotional intelligence, these type skills, behavioral evaluations, things like that, much more prominent. A lot of companies are even having candidates take psychological assessments or some sort of behavioral skills assessment, or I even at one point was asked to take a personality assessment before a potential job offer. So a lot more important than how companies are figuring out how good are you going to be at these types of things. And so managing relationships is much more than just being friendly, right? It really takes effort. It takes intention. And it also takes a little bit of strategy, right? Sometimes we have to work with people we don't like, right? And so how are we going to navigate that situation? How are we going to make sure that, even though it might be an uncomfortable situation, how are we going to manage that relationship so that we still show up and give our best and we're able to get what we need from the people in our teams or from the people that we work with? So, the goal of understanding emotional intelligence is not to tell people to suppress their emotions, right? I shared with you earlier on, I worked in healthcare for very many years. And there's kind of like this stereotype that, doctors don't feel and, they're insensitive. Um, because early on, especially a lot of the older generation healthcare providers, before EI sort of came into the forefront, they were taught really to kind of suppress their emotions. Um, and this was before we learned about all these coping mechanisms that could really help us better manage them. And now I'll share with you a lot of the major medical schools, including one that I had worked for in the past, builds emotional intelligence into their curriculum, which is pretty cool if you think about it. Because, as I mentioned, EI is a set of skills and abilities, right? It's people skills, it's self reflection activities, it's managing your communication styles, understanding your environment, conflict navigation. These are all skills that you can learn and you can practice. Active listening, right? So hopefully nobody's thinking about dinner right now as I'm talking, but all of those things are things that you can work on and you can build and you can develop. So the activity that I mentioned is really just when I was talking about the amygdala hijack, and obviously we're not in person, so we don't have to do this in pairs today. But if you want to take it, if anyone has a story that they, want to put in the chat, or if you've had a couple minutes to think about, a time when you did not manage your emotions well, and you would like to share that, I'd love to read them. I come back to them as we kind of continue on the presentation. But it has happened to all of us, myself included. I am not immune. I have had out of proportion reactions to several different situations in my life. Um, Sometimes it happens more than once during a week, right? And I think the important thing is like when this happens, when we have those out of proportion reactions, when we like flip out, so to speak, and our brains go offline. Why do we think that happens? Why did we have that reaction? So I'm not by any means saying that it's it happens. It's okay that it happens, but how are we going to learn from that to come back and be better? How are we going to make sure that the next time we are feeling that trigger or there's an external stressor, maybe you haven't had your Snickers bar, you're a little hungry, maybe you're not a morning person, and that coworker comes to you first thing in the morning and wants you to do a million and one things for them, and you haven't had your coffee yet, right? Why do we react sometimes in a negative way, or why do we have that sort of big reaction? uh, you know One thing I will share with you that I actually started trying to put into practice more. It's an EI strategy. It is a conflict management strategy, but we talked about how emotions were contagious, right? And so think about your first reaction when somebody blows up at you, right? What is it? Is it to calmly walk away? Is it to just ignore it? What do if we're being honest, what is our first reaction? I'll tell you, for me in the past, it was like, well, what do you mean? Or what are you doing? Or, I would immediately rise to meet their level of emotion. And that did not serve me well in the past. What I have had to start doing and what I have learned to do is take that pause, right? That self-reflection pause, okay, and think to myself, all right, why would a person who is normally reasonable, rational, logical, why would they behave this way? Why, what must be going on in their world today that they reacted like this, and that they are angry with me, or I didn't do anything wrong. Why are they yelling at me? What must be going on, right? And so that's also kind of practicing a little bit of empathy. I've had to work on my empathy as well. And then really just start to think like, okay, what's going on with this person? So one thing that I've started doing, if people react to me that way, is instead of rising to their level of emotion, I've been pausing and I've been responding with, "Is everything okay?" Right? So much power in not a lot of words. By asking somebody, "Hey, is everything okay?" Um, it really, really helps kind of break the tension. People don't expect that. And 9 times out of 10, you'll find like, no, everything's not okay with them. Maybe they were having a really bad day. Maybe they just needed somebody to listen. Um, one small thing that you can do to change your behavior can have a big and lasting impact on the people around you. So there's kind of two parts to this, right? The next time you start to feel your triggers and you're stressed about something, if you're not able to catch it in time and you do blow up, give yourself a little bit of grace, right? It happens. Take some time to collect yourself and really think about the answer to the question, why did I respond that way? And once you address it internally, you can go find the person and you can address it with them and apologize as well. And vice versa is true. If somebody reacts to you that way very strongly, right? Maybe instead of rising to that emotion, take that pause and say, why are they reacting this way? I hope everything's okay, and offer your support. It's definitely easier said than done. I understand, and that's part of something that working with a coach and practicing over time will help you get better at taking that reflective pause and taking that time to check in and sort of think about what else could be going on. But if you practice it, the more you do it, it'll help you build better relationships, not just in the workplace, but in your personal life as well. So, something to sort of think about as we navigate our relationships over the next several weeks. We're kind of going to move into some more now that we've provided an overview of emotional intelligence and some strategies and some background education. We're going to talk about what are the benefits of emotional intelligence. And I hope by now some of you have a pretty good idea about how this is going to help you get to that next level and really unlock your potential. But people with high emotional intelligence, they make better decisions. They solve problems in a more efficient way. They're able to keep cool under pressure, not because they don't have emotions, right? Nowhere in any book written about emotional intelligence does that mean that we want you to be robots. Absolutely not. But it means you're able to decide when to act on your emotions and when not to act, right? And so that's the important part. And that is why people with high EQ are able to sort of maintain their composure across a lot of different types of situations. People who have a high emotional intelligence, they're able to listen better. When someone's talking, they practice that active listening skill that I mentioned, and they really listen for understanding, right? The other thing I would invite you to think about is when people are talking to you, how many times do you formulate your own response in your head before they even finish talking? So you're not really listening for understanding, you're listening to respond. And that is a skill that can be built over time, really practicing a little bit more of that reflective listening. I'm looking at a comment from the chat. If a manager has an employee they believe to have low emotional intelligence, what would be some recommendations on how to handle that? Once it's low, will it always be low? Or what productive ways would help an employee work on it? A beautiful question. Thank you for asking. So the answer to the first part, if it's low, will it always be low? Oh, I'm sorry. Is no. Emotional intelligence is a skill that can be learned and that can be built. So sometimes people who have issues with communication, they will work with a corporate counselor or a coach. Some other things as far as from a leader to an employee standpoint, there's tons of resources out there. There's also a book called Crucial Conversations. I've recommended it many times and I've asked people to read it. But the first part starts with having a conversation with the employee. And so, Sometimes it can be difficult for people to respond to that type of criticism and constructive feedback. But if you frame it in a way such as your feedback is to help the employee get better, right? I'm a firm believer in there's really no such thing as negative feedback because I'm an educator and I've been in higher education for 10 years, but the purpose of feedback is to help you get better. And so I've had to have lots of conversations with colleagues and people on my teams and explain that honestly and openly and upfront in a way that, I'm telling you this because I want you to get better. One of the things that you can do, um, maybe between having those conversations is provide them with some resources on emotional intelligence. I've also, I've had managers bring emotional intelligence, you know, information, books, resources, handouts, or to their team meetings, and just start to have some conversations around what it is, and hopefully, sort of introducing the skill will get people interested on how to build it. But it really is how you frame the conversation with the employee. But that was a really, really good question. I'm glad that you asked that. Um, we know why emotional intelligence is such a valued skill in the workplace. Managers, they want their employees to have these skills. Why? Tons of reasons. So emotional intelligence overall leads to increased team performance. Why? Because happy employees are more productive employees. And you're going to be happier at work if you have those coping mechanisms to help you identify your emotions. And, when people are feeling stressed, it's very important that they have resources and support, right? And also that they have means in place to take action. So if you're stressed, what is it that you do to de stress yourself? Knowing the answer to that question alone means that you are emotionally intelligent or that you have practiced emotional intelligence at some point in your life, right? When I'm stressed, I exercise or I go for a walk with the dogs. Sometimes I do yoga. There are things that we have in place as kind of our own checks and balances. So decreased occupational stress in and of itself within an organization is huge. It's going to decrease burnout. And burnout is something that every single one of us probably suffered from at some point in our life, especially given, the last year and a half that many, all of us, whether we were working professionals or not, had to endure all of the uncertainty and the chaos and the changes. People who have had higher emotional intelligence and have those coping mechanisms in place and that support network are able to kind of, ask for help when you need it. That is a sign of an emotionally intelligent person, an emotionally intelligent employee. Really making sure that you are, doing everything you can to access the resources around you. We talked about improved decision making, people with high emotional intelligence. Why? Because they're able to separate like what they're feeling versus what their actions are. So it's okay if you get stressed. It's okay if that coworker annoys you. It's okay if you don't like them, but it's not okay to act or behave in a way that's unprofessional, right? And so really understanding the balance there. A lot of the leaders, in organizations and companies, especially the higher up you go, have had extensive training in emotional intelligence, or they've worked with coaches to help them build their emotional intelligence, to do some self-reflection exercises, some deeper dives into the material than what we did today, and really built upon the foundation of skills that make for a good leader, right? When you think about good leader you've had and you think about a bad leader you've had, spend some time sort of thinking about what are the call out qualities that each person had. And you might find yourself surprised that your list of good qualities are probably all related to emotional intelligence. Oh, another thing I wanted to call out too, I was on the slide, I just forgot to read it, but according to Career Builder, and there's been similar studies, done by LinkedIn and things like that, 75% of, top companies and respondents suggested, and we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, they do value emotional intelligence over intellectual intelligence. So think about that, in terms of some skills like communication management, things like that. What makes you competitive? What's going to give you a step up above the other candidate? Do you have, that set of skills and abilities? Have you invested that time in yourself to build upon that? There's lots of different ways that you can use emotional intelligence for professional success, right? It'll increase your motivation. Having increased self-awareness is really going to help you plan your career path, your next step. You have to know what you want in order to get it, right? Being emotionally intelligent and just overall being able to reframe the negative situations in our lives is going to make you more positive. And what did we say about happy people, happy employees? When you're happier, and more connected to the work you're doing, you're going to be more successful by default, right? We're always more successful when we're passionate and when we're engaged. What does empathy do for us? Empathy helps us build trust, and empathy helps us strengthen relationships. Listening is something that every single person can always work on. There, is never a time when you cannot practice better listening skills, myself included. So very important. Having emotional intelligence in the professional setting will help individuals better embrace change. If COVID was not a living, breathing example of that, I don't know what was. We all had to pivot from in person to virtual or some sort of hybrid model. And now many of us are in the face of having to do it again because we got used to working from home, and now that might change again. So how are we going to take that, emotional intelligence skills that we've had, and how are we going to manage the change? What are we going to do? What are some concrete things that we're going to lay out for ourselves in terms of strategies that are really going to help make sure that we're better equipped to handle those disruptions and those changes in our life? We talked about motivation, right? The biggest problem I hear from people is, too many of them are saying, I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't. And, the driving force behind behind the motivation of emotionally intelligent people is their drive to succeed, their sense of ambition, purpose, and determination. And so really being able to take that I can't statement and turn it around into why can't I? Or yes, I can. Positive thinking is very, very powerful. We already talked about emotions are contagious, right? We talked about body language. Just looking at someone before they say or do anything can impact your perception of them, can also impact your mood as well. So just being aware of kind of your surroundings, being aware of what's going on outside, of you and where you are in any given moment, and also being present with yourself and being aware of how you're feeling. We talked about how important self-awareness is. A lot of professional clients who seek coaching work with an individualized coach so that they can build their own self-awareness. Emotions are not something that everybody is, you know, um, initially inept at or that we all gravitate to. I've had clients in a lot of different places in their lives and in their career. And so sometimes, you need a little bit more work in, one area of the four quadrants, right? But that's okay. Identifying where you need to work on is really the first step to building your emotional intelligence. I just picked up on another question in the chat. Thanks, Belinda. Interviewers often ask the question, tell me about a time when. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That is super, super important. People with high emotional intelligence also interview better. I've interviewed a lot of people in my life and in my career, and I can definitely tell when people have put that work in the time and invested in themselves to build that versus the ones who haven't. So just that question, tell me about a time when, that's a behavioral analysis question. So that is a practical, right now, real world example of how employers are evaluating potential job candidates based on their emotional intelligence. So there is a whole science and a bunch of training that goes into training managers who interview people. I don't know if we have any managers on the call right now. I think we have at least one, but managers have to go through interview training, or at least in the organization that I worked for, it was a larger organization, so they had a little bit more resources, but all of the hiring managers were trained in behavioral event interviewing techniques. And the number one purpose of a behavioral event interview, or a BEI interview, is to assess emotional intelligence. So definitely something to think about. And, to the point of why we ask these things during interviews goes back to, these 5 things, right? Employers really want people who are going to be motivated, who are going to have self-awareness, right? Who are going to be able to manage their emotions at work, who are going to be positive, who are going to have empathy and really listen, especially if you're in a customer service or client-facing role, or even anything where you have to build teams, right? And they really want individuals who are going to be able to adapt and embrace change. Flexibility, adaptability, change resilience, some of the top 3 rated skills valued by employers today. And it makes sense when you think about it, right? Those are all things that we need to thrive and survive in today's job market. Nobody wants to hire the employee that's going to slam their fist on the table and, or throw their papers up in the air and say, I give up, right? So all of these things, being able to reframe those negative situations, mental attitude, positive attitude, so important in how we show up every day. One of the most impactful things that was ever said to me, in my career so far is you choose how you show up every day, right? Nobody can make that choice for you. It resonated with me and it really stuck with me over the years because it's true. We choose how we are going to show up. We choose how we want to show up. And all of that is built around our mindset, our attitude, and just our ability to kind of wake up in the morning, despite what setbacks we might face, despite, if we're hangry or we're tired or all of those things, and just say, we choose how we're going to show up. We might not be able to control everyone and everything around us, but we do have control over our own mindset. And so, people who are able to regulate that, people with high emotional intelligence, are really able to kind of embrace that positivity. In work, they're going to be more productive, they're going to be resourceful, flexible, and more open-minded, right? They're going to, be able to listen better. And when they listen, they're going to hear for understanding, right? And so really builds better, more impactful teams and creates a much more productive, cohesive work environment when everybody is working together to build their emotional intelligence. We already talked about empathy as being a huge part of that active listening, making sure that you are really tuning in to the people that you come across with every day. It just doesn't always have to be, during a formal team meeting, right? But really, when you're having those one-on-one conversations with people, really taking it back to what are the goals of this conversation? What are the goals of the organization? And, having empathy is going to help you work better with other people. It's something that's definitely going to get you noticed. Some of the most successful leaders are, the empaths, in that they hear and they feel and they make those around them feel like they really care. And who do we want to follow in terms of leaders in our lives, right? Do we want to follow somebody who burns us out and runs us to the ground and makes us feel like, all they care about is if we meet the deadline? Or do we want to follow a leader who we feel really cares about us and our success and our career growth? I would hope every one of you would say the latter, somebody that cares about you, because that's the goal here, right? To connect with companies and people who are really going to help you along the path and invest in your success and ask you to do the same. We talked about change. Change is really the only constant in life anymore. I believe change and death and taxes, right? That's what they say, is the only constant things in life. One of the most practical qualities of somebody who is emotionally intelligent is they won't run away from conflict or challenges, right? You'll notice, sometimes people call them the go-getters, but they don't run away from those challenges. They're not afraid of change or, you know, it's okay to be afraid. So even if they are, they decide to embrace it anyway. Because think back to like one of the earlier slides with the little kitten and the lion, people who are emotionally intelligent have a little bit more faith in themselves and in their abilities to overcome situations. So it's so valuable for setting yourself up for professional success. We also talked about stress management. And so people who have high emotional intelligence are able to much more easily adapt to shifting priorities, and they're going to be able to show up and meet deadlines and multiple demands from their stakeholders, which is exactly the type of behavior that employers look for in team members. And, not more importantly, but equally important in their leaders, right? Because you want a leader who's going to be able to motivate and inspire uh, their team members, even when things change, because sometimes that could be difficult when we have to navigate changes in our lives.